Welcome to the Avid Podcast. I'm your host, Alan Hart, CEO and founder of Avid, Unleashing Your Potential. Today on the show, I have Mark Hans Richer, CMO of Harley-Davidson. We're talking today about his recent Effie win for Dark Custom.
You've won an Effie for Dark Custom, and in particular, the Effie category was around sustained success, so those brands having success greater than 5 years. I'm curious, what do you feel was driving that success for you and the brand?
Well, I guess like anything, you have to have a goal, a serious objective that you're trying to apply creativity to. So it starts there. So the goal for us when we started Dark Custom, which started more like 7+ years ago, so it's a pretty long sustained success at Harley. And the goal was to drive relevance and the passions of the next generation of riders in the United States in particular, but also around the world. And this is something that obviously any business thinks about, but for Harley, we've been around for now 113 years, and every generation has passed the baton from one to the next, and the objective was to make sure that happened with this next very large generation of young adults coming through. And we've been very successful at that, but that was that was the goal. And at the time that we started it, there were some questions about whether we would or wouldn't be successful at making that generational baton pass. But that was really what drove all the Dark Custom initiatives.
Were there, so 7+ years is a long time. I actually love this category because most of the other award winners, so far it's one time, right? And you've been able to sustain this over the long haul. What decisions or critical points, over that time, I imagine pressures come from all different places. Are there things that you had to work through or maintain throughout that long period?
The challenge is always to stay true to your initial objectives and your strategies, because as time goes on and people come and go, people want to, and they should want to look at things with fresh eyes. But you don't want to lose the center of the insights that you started with unless there's a really good reason to. So there's always tension in that for any creative enterprise to stay true to the insights and also be selective about adding new things and knowing when the right time to do that is, if some fundamental situation changes. For us, keeping it consistent is really more about staying true to our customers, and because those truths don't change that much, it makes it a little bit easier for us. Our customers, younger ones or older ones, are very passionate about Harley-Davidson, and yet they sort of want to find themselves and their unique characteristics and personalities within Harley-Davidson. And so our job is really to liberate that, and the whole focus of Dark Custom was to find more ways to liberate relevance with younger generations of riders through the way our products look, through our lifestyle experiences, through clothes and online experiences that allow them to feel like this is their Harley-Davidson, not somebody else's Harley-Davidson. And so we've just been building that year after year, fine-tuning it, deepening it, spreading it around the world, because really this generation of young adults is in many people's view the first global generation of people on the planet. They have more in common. The guy growing up in Chicago has as much in common with the person growing up in Beijing as they do with a person in San Francisco. And so more and more these insights play themselves out around the world, and that has sort of helped with the success of this effort, not just in the United States, but all over, and has also made it more interesting as we've added more dimension to it every year.
And so over that time, you talk about insight. I'm just curious, what kind of tools or information do you use to make sure you're moving the brand in the right direction?
Well, the first thing you got to do is, what do you stand for? What does Harley-Davidson stand for? We've said many times that anything we're doing when we're trying to attract new customers is not to be all things to all people, but to be our thing to more people. But in order to be your thing, you also have to understand what their thing is and find the connection between the two. So in the case of Dark Custom is really about an ethos. If you think about one of the classic, known aspects of the Harley-Davidson lifestyle, it's tattoos. And if you know anything about this generation of young adults, there's a hell of a lot of tattoos going on. And yet, a lot of people didn't see those two things as connected somehow within Harley-Davidson. But the ethos of personal expression is very strong in younger adults today, perhaps even at least as much, if not more so, than in other generations before them. And so these insights that seem like, oh, wow, this generation's so different, we were actually looking for what is more the same, but then understand what is unique about the way they express that similar passion, and then how do we translate that within Harley-Davidson. I think a lot of times I've seen it happen where you assume that they're all so different that you need some totally different approach that isn't anything like what you do in order to grow with new customers. We look at it the other way, which is what is it that we already do that's already relevant, and how can we then scale that and deepen that through the passions of that particular customer base.
Right. Are there any tips you'd give other marketers about how to maintain relevance over a long time?
I think it's a little bit in the seed of my last answer, which is don't overthink it too much. Don't rush for the new thing. Take a look at what it is you're already doing that may already be working. You just don't see it because it might be small. So as an example, when we started this, the first question we asked was, well, what do we already sell to young adults? What do they already like about us? And the reason why that seemed like a surprising question is that there was a lot of assumptions from a lot of people, including outside the company, especially outside the company at that time, which is that, quote unquote, young adults don't like Harley, or because their dads or moms liked Harley, they must not like Harley. And we found that none of that was true, but a lot of people assumed that was the case. So we started with the very simplest question, which is, what do we already do that is motivating to young adults? Let's make sure we know that really, really well before we start playing around in new areas. And if we find a few nuggets that are already working, let's pick those up and scale those and spend our energies there before we decide how much incremental energy we have to spend to do all kinds of new things. I think a lot of marketers jump right for the new thing before they think about the current thing that they may already have a finger on. They just haven't dug deep enough to find out what the potential is in the sort of leverageable current asset versus some new asset they want to go create.
Great. Yeah, I like those tips. There's a team, I'm sure, behind all of this, as well as agency partners. How did that team come together, do you think, over this period of time?
Well, you're right. Nothing exists. Nothing happens without a whole team of really passionate and creative people. It's a very customer-led company here at Harley-Davidson, and we have people whose only job it is to think about particular customer types and be their advocate within the company. So we have, now this didn't exist when we started our custom, but we quickly switched our company focus into a sort of segment representative type of structure. So we have a person whose job it is to think about young adults and women and African Americans, Hispanics, and obviously all of our markets around the world, and put a lot of focus there. So they're kind of the hub of our efforts around the company that go through product and marketing and any aspect of experience that we provide for any of those customers. And so that's the beginning point of the team effort. We had many agencies along the way. No one agency that partnered with us any more than any other, because in order to do these well and to have sustained success, you have to be good at a lot of different things, whether it's events or online experiences and obviously advertising and promotion, but also designing and developing the products. So there's all kinds of talent that always has to come together for a sustained success. It's never one person, and it's never one supplier.
Good. How would you, obviously winning an Effie award is about marketing effectiveness. So I'm curious how you define what marketing effectiveness is.
First off, I love the whole idea of rewarding marketing effectiveness. So I think that's really what ultimately it's all about. And, I'm happy to have had a few Effies in my career so far, and they're really the things I'm most proud of because they represent, what is marketing for. And so the answer to your question about marketing effectiveness to me is it starts with increased relevance, because it's got to start with the customer. If what you're doing is not starting with building increased relevance for the customer, you're not going to get to the rest of it. So for me, it always starts there. That's the starting point of increased effectiveness. And then the measurement of that relevance is your increased sales and increased share. Because I think you can't just look at sales in a vacuum. You have to look at it in the context of all the other choices that customer has. And if they are deciding to vote with their passions in dollars or euro or whatever versus the alternate choice is really where it gets down to brass tacks. And for us in the Dark Custom experience, and I believe one of the reasons why we won the Gold Effie is because we gained more than 10 points of market share with young adults since 2008. And are now the number one selling motorcycle brand to young adults of any size on the road. And that was not true when we started this. So I think those results speak for themselves. And it all started in the answers I already gave you about an increased focus on relevance and how Harley-Davidson could be translated to greater relevance with those customers.
That's a phenomenal success. Congrats again. What I want to do now is kind of just, you're welcome. What I want to do now is just kind of step back and talk about you a little bit. You've reached a level of success in your career. You talked about actually being a part of multiple Effie wins. So what fuels you?
I love pulling things together on behalf of customers and growing with customers and growing business through customers. It gets me up in the morning. I'm pretty excited about that. Especially at Harley, it's easy to see. You get letters, you see people at rallies, you can really see the impact directly, and that's really, really fulfilling. But I guess in general, underneath all that is I'm pretty motivated by the challenge of counterintuitive breakthroughs and trying to take what seems obvious and trying to turning it around and looking at it in a different angle and trying to find a breakthrough within that. I just love that aspect of marketing, and it's obviously in pursuit of trying to connect better with customers. But I think a lot of times we take customers at very surfacey levels of understanding, and we have marketing tools that sometimes we let to be pretty surfacey levels of delivery of those surfacey levels of understanding, and trying to dig underneath that and trying to get into really deeper and more effective creations is really what drives me and always will drive me.
Great. So I don't know how many times I've gotten, the answer that Harley-Davidson is a brand I follow from other marketers. So I'm curious, what the chief marketer of Harley-Davidson, what brands do you follow?
I've already thought about this one, and I figured that the answer, all of them, is not a good answer. But I am kind of curious. I am curious about all brands. I think that there's something to be learned on anyone's challenge. And in my other parts of my career, I've worked on packaged goods and other things. So there's always something to be learned by any marketer, any brand's challenges, for good or bad. But the ones that I think I probably pay more attention to on a regular basis, no surprise, Apple. I just think that they have an amazing business that has proven to be very nimble despite their size, which is really impressive. And obviously the whole spirit of creativity that a company represents is really meaningful to me and always has been. Obviously I pay attention to all of our competitors because we have a competitive industry, and I have to understand what they're doing and the good things they're trying to do and how that affects us. But beyond that, I would say maybe a little counterintuitive. I follow other great global brands like Manchester United, who I think have just done an amazing job connecting with the passions of people around the world in ways that may not have seemed obvious 20 years ago. And up-and-coming brands, although I don't think you probably call it that anymore, that have become very scalable and very culturally powerful, like Facebook as an example, which seems a little bit almost old school to talk about Facebook, but what they've been able to do and build on a scalable cultural plane, to me, is very impressive, and it's clear that they have a lot of other potential that they haven't yet tapped. And so I'm curious about how they're creating that within their their existing brand and building that brand and their business for the future. So I'm very curious about those journeys, especially as they reach their cultural scale, because that's what Harley-Davidson is. We play on a cultural scale, and so I'm always curious about those other brands that do the same thing.
Great. So thinking about marketing and marketing trends, what do you see as the most important marketing trend or opportunity today?
This is such a trick question. It's easy to jump after, hey, there's this new techno thing and whatever. I think marketers, and I think actually it's funny, I think all marketers know this, but we're all still sort of prey to it. We're prey to the shiny object and, jumping after the new thing. And I just think that's a risk that we all face. And I might face it too, because I get excited about new things, and we all should know about new things, but we shouldn't overemphasize them necessarily. And so I would say that the trend, as I see it, is more of a broader trend into the future, which I've sometimes referred to as DNA level marketing or hyper-personal marketing. And it isn't totally enabled yet by the technology we need. And I'm not talking about literal DNA, obviously, but although maybe in healthcare they are talking about literal DNA. That's probably a future marketing opportunity for them. But you're talking about getting down to a real personal level. We at Harley are very customer-led, and we really try to get into sort of one-on-one types of understandings. We are limited by our ability to have the right kind of technology and frankly, the right premise for a customer to feel comfortable with that sort of, level of sharing, even in our customer base. There's limits to what people want to have as a relationship with a company. And the nature of a relationship, quote unquote, with a company is always a little bit of challenging because, it's not a relationship like you have with your family necessarily, although it can feel genuinely deep. They don't want you calling all the time. They don't want you showing up their door, saying, hey, here I am, I'm Harley-Davidson. I brought a casserole. Let's have some fun. That's not the kind of relationship that people are really looking for from companies, but they do want to be understood. They do want to be recognized. They do want to have, that kind of respect that should come from an interpersonal, one-on-one understanding of that customer relationship. And I think there's just a long way to go for marketers to get there and really deliver what I believe people intuitively want, which is that surprise and delight of, wow, this company really knows me, they really respect me, and they're really, they can align based on my individual needs. And it's something we talk a lot about, but I don't think we deliver all that well across marketing. And I see it as now the technology is enabling it. Next 5, 10, 15 years, I expect to see a real sea change in our ability to do that and do it in a way that doesn't feel awkward for customers.
Okay. Great. And you've already talked about the challenge, not to put words in your mouth, but chasing the shiny objects. Do you see any other challenges you would, caution marketers against today, or any specific shiny objects that you think might be getting in the way?
I think I have a personal passion around this thing about generations that we like to throw out, this phrase, we and it isn't just marketers, it's, I think, journalists and others focus on these ideas, this construct of generations. And I just talked about DNA level marketing, about trying to understand people on a one-on-one level, and then we want to try to sort of on the surface understand them all as one big generation of people, like all baby boomers or all millennials. More and more you talk about it, it just doesn't make any sense that, pick any 10 people of either one of those generations, and I guarantee you will find at least as many differences as you find similarities. And to sort of broad brush them into generational understanding just doesn't make any sense to me, and yet we do it over and over and over again as if they are one big monolith, and it just doesn't make sense. So I just think that generations is a sort of meaningless generic construct, and we should try to get past it if we can. And millennials in particular, I think, is maybe already getting overcooked as a focus, not because young adults aren't important to a lot of businesses, because they are, but this generation, any generation of young people are really diverse and really have a lot of different things going on and different passions and characteristics, and we should be, as marketers, trying to get underneath the surface of that and not taking it at some sort of broad level about all millennials like blank or all millennials act like blank. if that's as deep as it goes, we're not doing our jobs. And then the last part, I guess I would say on generations is, again, this perhaps over focus on millennials at the cost of other generations that are really good customers. We talk a lot about the buying power of millennials. The buying power of baby boomers is many multiples of the current buying power of millennials. Clearly, the future present value, or the net present value of the future benefit of millennials' purchasing power is obviously in people's minds, and feeling like if you can build a relationship with them, then that will keep bearing fruit for a long, long time. But there is a lot of business and customer experience to be had with many other generations at many multiples of the current value of the millennials. And for any business, I think you have to be good at looking at both of those, not just one or the other. And I just feel like generally we're spending a lot of time talking about one generation, and maybe it's at the expense of other opportunities that we shouldn't be overlooking as well.
Well, great. Thank you very much for having this conversation with us.
Thank you. It was fun, and appreciate you taking the time.